The land does not announce itself as hostile. It appears open, quiet, almost empty. Heat settles across the surface like a held breath pressing downward rather than radiating outward. Light spreads without shadow, flattening distance until near and far lose meaning. In this place, nothing rushes, nothing warns. Everything waits. Movement here carries weight. Each step disturbs more than sand. It stirs heat stored beneath the surface, releasing it upward back into the body that dared to move. Wind offers no comfort. It slides across the ground, warm and dry, pulling moisture from skin without cooling it. Even stillness demands effort. The land does not permit rest, only pauses. This is an environment where survival is often misunderstood. From a distance, the rules seem simple. Those who act quickly survive. Those who hesitate fall behind. Speed, decisiveness, instinct. These are the qualities we expect to dominate here, and often they do. But the desert has a way of exposing the limits of certainty. It does not challenge strength directly. It challenges endurance, recovery, and timing forces that act quietly long after decisions are made. Heat does not kill immediately. It accumulates. Effort does not announce its cost. It delays it. In this landscape, the consequences of action rarely align with the moment of action itself. What seems successful now may unravel hours later. What looks like restraint may preserve life in ways that are impossible to recognize in the moment. This is where instinct begins to falter. Instinct evolved for patterns that repeat predictably. Chase, capture, feed, recover. But here, recovery is uncertain. Shade is incomplete. Water is not guaranteed. Time works against the body even when nothing else does. The land introduces a variable that instinct alone cannot solve the cost of continuing. Every creature that survives here is forced into a negotiation it did not choose. Move too much, and the body fails later. Move too little, and opportunity disappears. The margin between these outcomes is narrow, invisible, and constantly shifting. There is no stable balance, only adjustment. This is why the desert does not reward aggression the way other places do. It rewards precision. It favors those who recognize when effort becomes liability. It eliminates those who do not. Yet from the outside, these eliminations look like mysteries. Animals are found where they should not have died. Hunts that should have ended cleanly do not. Success gives way to collapse without warning. Observers search for causes, injury, conflict, error, while the true reason remains hidden in timing and temperature. The desert does not explain itself. It simply enforces outcomes. This story begins here before any single action takes place. Before pursuit, before escape, before choice. It begins with a question that has no simple answer. What happens when instinct pushes forward, but survival demands restraint? Because in places like this, the most dangerous moment is not the chase. It is the decision to continue. Many animals do not fail because they are weak. They fail because they succeed too far, too long, too confidently. They cross an invisible threshold where effort can no longer be recovered from. The desert waits for that crossing. It does not intervene early. It does not correct. It allows momentum to build until stopping becomes impossible, and then it collects. What makes this landscape unforgiving is not its violence, but its patience. It allows mistakes to feel harmless. It lets confidence persist. It gives no signal when the cost has become irreversible. By the time the body understands, the environment has already moved on. This is why some survivors appear to act against expectation. Why hesitation appears where decisiveness should be. Why opportunity is sometimes ignored rather than seized. These are not errors in instinct. They are adaptations to a rule that instinct alone cannot rewrite. Here, survival is not about winning every moment. It is about avoiding the one moment that ends everything. As the light shifts and the day begins to tighten its grip, the land remains unchanged. The same heat, the same silence, the same indifference. What will change are the choices made within it. And somewhere within this environment, a single decision whether to move forward or stop will reveal a truth the desert enforces without mercy. In extreme places, instinct is not always enough. Sometimes survival depends on knowing when not to act. In most places on Earth, survival follows patterns that feel intuitive. A predator moves when hunger rises. Prey responds with flight. Speed decides the outcome. Decisiveness is rewarded. Hesitation is punished. These rules repeat often enough that instinct becomes reliable, a script refined over generations. But the desert rewrites that script. Here the environment introduces a force that does not care about intent or skill. Heat does not distinguish between hunter and hunted. It does not reward effort. It does not acknowledge victory. It simply accumulates minute by minute, turning movement itself into risk. The first law of survival in this landscape is simple and unforgiving. Energy is not the only currency recovery is. In cooler or resource-rich ecosystems, exertion is temporary. A chase ends, a kill is made, and the body repairs itself. Shade is available. Water is nearby. Time works with the animal, not against it. Even mistakes can be absorbed if food is plentiful enough. The desert removes that safety net. Here, every burst of speed deposits heat into the body faster than it can be released. Panting expels moisture that cannot be replaced easily. Shade reduces exposure, but rarely reverses internal damage quickly. Recovery becomes conditional, fragile, and easily interrupted. Once a threshold is crossed, stopping does not undo what has already begun. This creates the second law: consequences are delayed. A predator can complete a hunt successfully and still die later. Not from injury, not from starvation, but from the cost of effort paid too late. The desert allows this disconnect between cause and outcome, making danger difficult to read in real time. The body may continue functioning while damage accumulates quietly beneath the surface. Because of this delay, instinct becomes unreliable. Instinct is designed to solve immediate problems. It pushes toward completion. It favors momentum. But in the desert, momentum is often what carries an animal past the point of return. There is no instinctive signal that clearly marks the boundary where success turns lethal. The land provides no warning when that line is near. This leads to the third law: timing matters more than outcome. A successful hunt at the wrong hour can be fatal. A short chase under rising heat can cost more than a longer one at dusk. Feeding too long under direct sun may undo the benefit of the kill itself. Survival is no longer about whether an action succeeds, but when it succeeds, and what conditions surround it. The desert also enforces a fourth law: visibility invites pressure. Extended movement draws attention. An animal that ranges too widely or hunts too frequently becomes predictable. Others observe. Rivals test boundaries. Weakness is detected not through failure, but through persistence. Those who move the most are often the first to be challenged. As a result, territory in the desert is not held through constant presence. It is held through selective visibility, appearing enough to deter intrusion, but not so much that the body pays an unsustainable price. This balance is difficult to maintain and impossible to perfect. There is also a final law that governs everything else. There is no optimal strategy. Conditions change faster than behavior can adapt. Temperature fluctuates. Prey availability shifts. Water disappears without pattern. A strategy that preserves life one week may fail the next. Survival here is not about finding the right approach. It is about remaining flexible within narrowing limits. These laws do not replace instinct. They override it. Animals that survive in this environment do so, not because they are stronger or faster, but because their behavior remains within boundaries enforced by heat, time, and recovery. Those that cannot adjust are removed quietly. There is rarely evidence of struggle. The desert does not dramatize its outcomes. From the outside, these removals look like anomalies. A predator found without injury. A chase abandoned without explanation. A territory left uncontested without conflict. But these are not errors. They are the visible edges of an invisible system. The most dangerous misconception about survival in places like this is the belief that effort equals resilience. In the desert, effort often shortens survival rather than extending it. Persistence is not inherently virtuous. Sometimes it is fatal. This is why the traditional narrative of predator and prey begins to fracture here. The hunter is not always rewarded for commitment. The prey is not always saved by speed. Both are subject to the same environmental pressure that does not take sides. Within this framework, restraint becomes a survival skill, not hesitation born of fear, but limitation born of necessity. The ability to stop, to disengage from an action that instinct demands, becomes as critical as the ability to act decisively when conditions allow. This is not a contradiction. It is an adaptation to a rule set that punishes excess more reliably than absence. These laws are never taught directly. They are enforced through consequence repeated until only certain behaviors remain viable. Animals that fail to respect them disappear before they can pass on alternative strategies. What persists is not intelligence, but alignment with environmental limits. Understanding these rules does not make survival easier. It makes it narrower. And within that narrowing space, every decision carries weight, not just in what it achieves, but in what it makes impossible afterward. This is the context in which the story unfolds. Not as a battle between predator and prey, but as a negotiation between instinct and environment. A negotiation with no neutral ground, no forgiveness, and no final resolution. The stage is set. What comes next is not a test of strength, but of judgment played out under rules that cannot be bent. The moment does not arrive with drama. It slips in quietly disguised as routine. Movement begins early, while the air still carries a trace of night. The ground is firm enough to travel, cool enough to allow effort without immediate cost. In these hours, the desert feels almost permissive. Distance can be covered. Decisions can be made without consequence, catching up too quickly. This is when the rules usually favor instinct. The predator senses opportunity long before it appears clearly. A disturbance in the sand. A rhythm out of place. The signal is subtle but unmistakable. The body responds without hesitation, lowering, aligning, preparing. This sequence has repeated across countless generations, refined until it feels automatic. Expectation settles in. The path ahead is open. There are no obstacles that would prolong pursuit. The timing is correct. The distance is manageable. Everything suggests a clean resolution. This is the kind of moment instinct was designed for. The predator advances. Each step closes the gap efficiently. Breath remains steady. Muscles respond without resistance. The body has not yet reached the point where effort begins to compound. This is the window where success should come easily, where decisiveness is rewarded and hesitation punished. Then something shifts, not externally. The environment does not change. The prey does not behave unexpectedly. There is no sudden obstacle, no surprise movement that alters the calculation. The shift happens internally, without signal or explanation. Pace reduces. It is slight, barely perceptible at first. Not enough to be called stopping. Not enough to alarm the prey immediately. Just enough to interrupt momentum. The body remains capable. The distance is still closing. But the rhythm has broken. This is the first anomaly. Instinct pushes forward, but something else presses back. Not fear. Not exhaustion. But an unspoken limit. The predator does not surge to correct the loss. It does not compensate for the slowdown with aggression. Instead, it allows the gap to hold. The prey senses this before it understands it. Flight begins, not frantic, not desperate, but timely. The direction chosen favors uneven ground, where pursuit becomes less predictable. Within seconds, the advantage shifts. The moment that should have resolved cleanly begins to stretch. The predator stops, not abruptly, not in panic. It simply disengages, redirecting its body away from the line of pursuit, as if responding to a rule no one else can see. The chase ends without contact, without struggle, without resolution. Silence returns. From the outside, the scene reads as failure, a missed opportunity, a lapse in decisiveness. In many environments, this would be the beginning of decline, a mistake that compounds quickly as hunger presses and chances diminish. But the desert does not respond immediately. The predator remains upright, alert, intact. Breathing deepens briefly, then steadies. The body cools as movement ceases. There is no visible penalty, no immediate signal that the decision was costly. This lack of consequence is deceptive. The first anomaly is not defined by what happens next. It is defined by what does not happen. There is no collapse, no injury, no obvious reason to regret stopping. The environment allows the decision to feel neutral, perhaps even prudent. This is how the desert teaches, by delaying judgment. The predator moves towards shade, minimizing exposure, conserving what remains. Time passes without further action. The moment recedes unresolved. Nothing in the immediate aftermath confirms that restraint was necessary or that it was a mistake. But something has changed. The rhythm of movement is altered. Steps become more measured. Ranging behavior tightens. Paths that once felt routine are avoided without conscious reason. The internal boundary that interrupted the chase remains present, shaping decisions before they fully form. The desert offers another opportunity later, under slightly different conditions. The setup is similar. The expectation returns, and again the rhythm breaks. This time the pause is shorter. The disengagement comes sooner. The pattern begins to repeat. Each instance carries the same characteristics: no external trigger, no visible weakness, no immediate cost. Just a consistent refusal to push beyond a certain point, especially when resolution threatens to extend. These are not dramatic failures. They are small deviations, easy to dismiss, easy to misinterpret. But in an environment governed by accumulation rather than immediacy, small deviations matter. The first anomaly does not announce a turning point. It introduces uncertainty. It suggests that the rules outlined earlier, speed, decisiveness, completion, may no longer apply cleanly here. That instinct, once reliable, is now negotiating with something else, a constraint that cannot be felt directly, only inferred through consequence. At this stage, the story does not offer clarity. There is no evidence that restraint is advantageous. There is no proof that aggression would be fatal. The predator stands between two interpretations, and the desert withholds confirmation. This ambiguity is deliberate. The environment allows behavior to persist long enough to feel justified, even if it will later prove costly. It encourages confidence to build before revealing its price. This is why the first anomaly is so dangerous, not because of what it changes immediately, but because of what it permits to continue. The predator has stepped outside expectation without stepping into danger. Yet, the desert does not correct early. It waits, and as the predator moves on, carrying this unexplained hesitation into the next decision, the question deepens. Is restraint here an error that will compound into failure, or the first sign of alignment with a rule? Instinct alone cannot solve. The answer will not come quickly. It never does. The second deviation arrives without warning and without spectacle. Time has passed since the first disengagement, enough for the body to return to baseline, enough for the environment to feel familiar again. Hunger sharpens perception, but not urgently. The predator's movements remain controlled, economical. Nothing suggests decline. If anything, restraint has preserved energy. From the outside, the strategy appears sound. Conditions shift subtly. The air warms earlier than expected. Light intensifies, flattening the terrain and erasing depth. Shadows shrink before they can be used. These changes do not register as danger. They are common enough to be ignored, gradual enough to feel manageable. Opportunity presents itself again. The signal is clearer this time. Prey is exposed movement unguarded. Distance favors engagement. The terrain offers no immediate complication. This is not a marginal chance, it is a strong one. The predator aligns and commits. The initial phase unfolds cleanly. Momentum builds. The gap closes. Instinct asserts itself, urging completion before variables can intervene. This is the moment where previous restraint might be abandoned, where the earlier hesitation could be corrected through decisiveness. But it isn't. As pursuit stretches beyond expectation, seconds longer than optimal, the familiar internal boundary returns. Heat accumulates faster now. Breathing widens. The cost of each stride increases incrementally, not enough to force stopping, but enough to be felt. The predator adjusts, reducing speed slightly to manage the load. This choice is subtle, reasonable. In most environments, it would be inconsequential. Here it is decisive. The prey detects the shift immediately. Not because the predator is failing, but because the margin has narrowed just enough to allow response. Direction changes. Terrain becomes uneven. The chase elongates. The predator presses on briefly, attempting to reclaim momentum. But the window has closed. Completion now demands a longer commitment, one that pushes against the internal limit already reached. The decision is made again. Disengagement. The predator withdraws, not abruptly but deliberately. The chase dissolves without contact, leaving behind disturbed sand and nothing else. The prey escapes into complexity where pursuit would be costly, even under ideal conditions. Once more, the environment offers no immediate penalty. Breathing stabilizes. Body temperature drops gradually. No collapse follows. The predator remains capable, intact, and alert. On the surface, nothing has been lost except time. This is where the error becomes difficult to recognize. Each disengagement preserves short-term stability. Energy remains available. Recovery is quicker. The body avoids crossing thresholds that would compromise survival later in the day. From a narrow perspective, restraint appears beneficial, but the desert operates on accumulation. Territory begins to shift, not through confrontation, but through absence. Areas once patrolled frequently are visited less. Paths narrow. Presence becomes predictable. Others notice. Rivals test boundaries quietly, not through attack, but through proximity. The predator responds by avoiding escalation, conserving energy, maintaining distance. These decisions are logical, consistent with the same restraint that halted the hunts. The cost remains invisible. Food intake declines slightly, but not enough to cause alarm. Weight remains stable. Function persists. There is no single moment that signals decline. Instead, there is a gradual erosion of position, masked by continued survival. This is the second mistake. Not the choice to disengage, but the assumption that disengagement carries no long-term cost. In the desert, absence creates opportunity for others. Space not actively defended does not remain neutral. It is absorbed. The predator does not lose territory through defeat, but through relinquishment. The environment allows this to happen quietly. Days pass. The pattern repeats. Strong opportunities arise, extend slightly beyond optimal duration, and are abandoned. Each time the decision feels justified, each time the immediate outcome reinforces restraint. But the balance is shifting. Recovery windows shorten as available shade diminishes. Water sources become more contested. The predator ranges farther to find the same opportunities, increasing exposure without increasing success. Effort is conserved during hunts, but expanded during search. This inversion is subtle and dangerous. What was meant to preserve energy begins to spend it elsewhere. Movement increases without resolution. Time under heat lengthens without reward. The body compensates, but the margin tightens. The desert does not intervene. It does not correct strategy. It simply continues enforcing conditions that amplify small inefficiencies over time. The second mistake is not dramatic. It does not end the story. It deepens it. By now, restraint is no longer a response to immediate pressure. It has become a default. Instinct, once eager to complete, now yields quickly to internal limits. The predator survives each day, but with diminishing leverage. This is not failure in the conventional sense. There is no collapse, no confrontation, No clear point where the strategy reveals itself as flawed. Instead, there is a slow narrowing of options. The predator remains alive, but less present. Capable but constrained. Successful but rarely. And the desert continues to wait. Because environments like this do not punish one mistake. They punish patterns. The second deviation has passed without consequence. The third will not. The third moment does not resemble the first two. There is no ambiguity left in it. Conditions have tightened. The day begins warmer than expected, the night offering less relief than before. Shade is fragmented and temporary. The ground radiates heat earlier, holding it longer. Recovery now demands precision rather than patience. The margins that once allowed disengagement without consequence have narrowed. Opportunity appears anyway. The signal is unmistakable. Prey moves through open ground with limited cover. Distance favors engagement. The timing is imperfect, but acceptable. Waiting risks losing the chance entirely. Acting risks extending beyond the internal limit that has already asserted itself twice. This is where hesitation becomes dangerous. The predator commits not because conditions are ideal, but because they may not improve. Momentum builds more slowly this time. Each stride feels heavier. Heat rises faster than before. Breathing deepens early, forcing moisture out of a body that cannot easily replace it. The chase stretches. The prey responds with urgency, choosing terrain that fractures pursuit into uneven segments. Direction shifts repeatedly. The predator compensates, adjusting angle and pace to maintain pressure. Instinct demands completion now, not because it is optimal, but because retreat would concede too much. This is the moment restraint was meant to prevent. The internal boundary returns sharply, no longer subtle. Muscles tighten instead of releasing. Coordination remains intact, but efficiency drops. Each correction costs more than it should. The predator is not failing, it is being taxed. Stopping now would preserve the body, but surrender the chance entirely. Continuing risks crossing a threshold from which recovery may not be possible. There is no clear indicator of where that threshold lies. The desert offers no guidance. The predator presses on. Seconds accumulate. Heat compounds. The prey stumbles briefly enough to suggest resolution is close. Instinct surges, overriding caution. This is the decisive window that has been missing before. Then the body resists, not with collapse, but with constraint. Speed cannot increase further. Breathing widens, pulling in air that offers no cooling. The effort required to maintain pace now exceeds what the body can repay through recovery. The predator disengages again. But this time, disengagement does not resolve the situation. Breathing does not stabilize quickly. Heat lingers. Movement toward shade is slower, less coordinated. The body remains functional, but the cost of the chase continues to unfold after it is ended. This is the third deviation, and it is different. The predator reaches partial cover, lowering exposure but not reversing internal accumulation. Time passes. The prey is gone. The moment is over, but the consequence remains active, progressing quietly beneath the surface. Recovery stretches longer than expected. Muscles respond sluggishly. Thirst intensifies. The predator remains alert, but movement is reduced. Ranging behavior tightens further, not strategically, but out of necessity. The body demands restraint now, not as a choice, but as a requirement. This is the point where there is no clean correction. Aggression would accelerate decline. Restraint preserves function, but limits opportunity. The pattern that once felt adaptive now constrains every option available. The desert closes around the margin. Later that day, rivals appear not confrontational, but observant. They test proximity, sensing reduced presence. The predator avoids escalation, conserving what remains. Territory contracts again, not through loss, but through withdrawal. Food becomes harder to secure. Opportunities arise less frequently within the narrowed range. When they do, conditions are rarely optimal. Each choice is framed by fatigue rather than possibility. The third deviation reveals the cost of accumulated restraint, not because restraint is inherently wrong, but because it cannot compensate indefinitely for environmental pressure. The strategy that avoided immediate danger has carried the predator into a position where every option carries risk. This is the paradox the desert enforces. Push too far and the body fails later. Hold back too often and the environment erodes position until survival becomes fragile anyway. There is no stable solution, only trade-offs that shift with time, temperature, and chance. The predator has reached the point where retreat no longer resets the system. Each disengagement now preserves less. Each commitment costs more. The window where instinct and environment could be reconciled has narrowed beyond visibility. The desert does not mark this moment as special. There is no dramatic signal, no visible collapse. Life continues constrained, but ongoing. From the outside, the predator still appears capable. But internally, the negotiation has changed. Decisions are no longer about optimization. They are about damage control. The question is no longer whether to act, but how little action can be taken without surrendering entirely. This is what no way back looks like in extreme environments. Not a cliff, but a narrowing corridor. Not failure, but compression. The predator remains alive, but the space in which survival can occur has become small, precise, unforgiving. The desert has not punished a single mistake. It has punished a sequence. And now, as heat continues to build and opportunities grow rarer, the story approaches its inflection point, not where instinct fails outright, but where its usefulness becomes conditional. What happens next will not be decided by speed or strength. It will be decided by whether restraint, once protective, can still function when there is nothing left to retreat into. The next test does not arrive as an opportunity. It arrives as pressure. Conditions no longer offer choice. Heat builds early and refuses to recede. Shade fragments into narrow strips that shift faster than the body can follow. The ground radiates upward continuously, erasing the brief relief that once followed stillness. Recovery, once delayed, now feels incomplete, even after rest. The predator adapts its behavior, but adaptation has become reactive rather than strategic. Movement is reduced to necessity. Ranging tightens further not to conserve energy, but because the body resists extension. Every step carries awareness of cost. Instinct still urges engagement when signals appear, but now it competes with fatigue that does not reset. This is the environment closing in. Opportunity appears in a compromised form. Prey moves through contested ground, aware alert, not exposed long enough to allow a clean approach. The timing is poor. The angle is imperfect. In earlier days, this would have been ignored without consequence. Now, ignoring it risks losing the day entirely. The predator hesitates not from uncertainty, but from calculation. Engaging means committing under suboptimal conditions. Disengaging means conserving a body that is already paying for previous restraint. Neither option promises safety. Both carry delayed costs. Instinct pushes forward anyway. The body lowers, aligns, advances. The first movements are controlled, but effort registers immediately. Heat spikes faster than before. Breathing widens earlier moisture loss, accelerating under a sun that offers no interruption. The prey reacts quickly, choosing routes that force lateral adjustments. Each correction compounds cost. The predator compensates, drawing on reserve that has already been reduced by days of limited recovery. This is the point where instinct reaches for its final lever escalation. Speed increases not dramatically, but enough to close distance. The prey falters briefly. Resolution seems possible again, not because conditions favor it, but because momentum demands it. Then the body refuses, not with collapse, not with visible failure, with limitation. Muscles no longer convert effort efficiently. Coordination remains intact, but responsiveness dulls. The predator can continue but cannot escalate further. This ceiling is new. It did not exist before. Instinct presses against it without result. The chase extends past the window, where disengagement preserves function. Stopping now does not undo accumulation. Continuing risks, pushing the body into a state where even shade cannot stabilize it. The predator recognizes this not through conscious thought, but through resistance that no longer yields. Disengagement occurs again, but this time it is incomplete. The predator withdraws, but recovery does not follow. Breathing remains elevated. Heat lingers beneath the skin. The body seeks shade instinctively, but the relief is shallow, temporary. The internal state does not reset. This is the limit, not the end of capability, but the end of flexibility. The body has lost the ability to absorb mistakes quietly. Every future action will register immediately and persist longer. The environment responds without drama. Rivals approach closer than before, sensing constraint. They do not attack. They observe. Presence alone exerts pressure. The predator avoids confrontation, preserving function, but each avoidance cedes space. Food opportunities narrow further. What remains requires either speed the body can no longer access, or endurance it cannot sustain. The predator survives on margins, now not strategy. This chapter is not defined by a single wrong decision. It is defined by the moment when instinct can no longer compensate for environment through adjustment alone. The desert has forced a convergence. Aggression without recovery leads to collapse. Restraint without opportunity leads to erosion. There is no path that preserves both body and position. Survival has become conditional on chance rather than control. This is the cost of being pushed to the limit. The predator still moves, still hunts, still responds. But the range of viable behavior has shrunk. Decisions that once offered multiple outcomes now funnel towards similar consequences. The system has simplified not in the predator's favor, but in the environment's. The most dangerous aspect of this stage is its subtlety. There is no dramatic failure to signal urgency, no injury to justify withdrawal. From the outside, the predator appears functional. From within, the negotiation has ended. The body no longer bargains, it enforces. The desert does not escalate further. It does not need to. By pushing instinct to its boundary, it has revealed the truth that governs survival here. Adaptation is not infinite. Even the most refined restraint reaches a point where it cannot offset environmental pressure any longer. What remains is endurance without leverage. The predator has not lost because it was weak. It has not survived because it was strong. It has reached the point where survival depends less on choice and more on what the environment allows on any given day. This is the threshold the desert waits for. Beyond it, there are no clean lessons, only outcomes. The next chapter will not test instinct again. It will test what happens when the environment decides that the negotiation is over. The warning does not arrive as pain. It arrives as silence. A stretch of time passes where nothing happens. No opportunities emerge. No rivals press closer. The desert appears to loosen its grip, offering a deceptive pause. Heat remains, but it stabilizes. Shade holds longer. Movement feels possible again, limited but manageable. This is the most dangerous phase. The predator resumes activity, cautiously testing range, the way a body tests weight after injury. Steps are deliberate. Stops are frequent. The internal ceiling established earlier still exists, but it no longer feels immediate. The absence of consequence invites reconsideration. This is how the desert draws the line closer without marking it. Opportunity returns in an unexpected form. Prey moves slowly, exposed longer than usual, likely weakened by the same conditions that have constrained the predator. The angle is not ideal, but better than recent chances. Distance is moderate. Timing is late, but not critical. The setup feels survivable. Instinct responds with restraint layered over readiness. The predator advances carefully, avoiding early acceleration, managing breath, conserving moisture. This is not a reckless engagement. It is measured, controlled deliberately, limited. The approach works. Distance closes without escalation. The prey hesitates, misjudging threat level. For the first time in days, resolution appears achievable without crossing the internal boundary. This should be the correction the story has been waiting for. but the environment has already accounted for this moment. The chase begins brief and contained. Speed increases only slightly. The prey bolts late, choosing direct flight rather than terrain-based evasion. Everything suggests that completion will occur quickly before accumulation becomes dangerous. Then the sign appears, not in movement, not in breathing, in coordination. A step lands imperfectly. Balance compensates, but the adjustment is slower than it should be. Another stride follows functional, but misaligned. These are not failures. They are discrepancies small enough to ignore, but precise enough to matter. The body is signaling fatigue that no longer resets. Instinct urges completion. The prey is close now. Momentum favors resolution. But the internal resistance returns faster than before, sharper, more restrictive. The ceiling that once appeared only under extended effort now asserts itself immediately. The predator hesitates for a fraction of a second. That fraction is enough. The prey changes direction, escaping into complexity that guarantees extension. The predator disengages instinctively, redirecting towards shade, choosing preservation over pursuit. This time the cost arrives immediately. Breathing does not stabilize. Heat does not dissipate. The body responds as if the threshold has already been crossed, even though effort was limited, even though escalation was controlled. Recovery fails to follow. The predator reaches cover and remains still. Time passes. The internal state remains elevated. Thirst intensifies. Muscles hold tension without release. This is not collapse. It is persistence without recovery. This is the sign of the critical point. The environment has removed the buffer. From here on, effort registers fully and instantly. There is no delayed consequence anymore. Every action carries immediate cost. The system has shifted from accumulation to saturation. The desert does not announce this transition. It simply enforces it. Later that day, the predator attempts minor movement, repositioning, adjusting range slightly. The body responds sluggishly. Not disabled, but constrained beyond what instinct expects. The discrepancy between intent and output widens. Rivals sense the change. They do not confront directly. They reposition, occupying space previously avoided. Presence increases without challenge. The predator withdraws, again conserving function, but each withdrawal reinforces the shift in balance. Food becomes sporadic. Opportunities require either speed the body can no longer access or endurance it cannot sustain. The predator survives on minimal intake sufficient to continue, insufficient to recover. This is the point of no return, not because death is imminent, but because adaptation has reached its limit. The restraint that once preserved life can no longer create opportunity. The aggression that might reclaim position cannot be supported physically. The system has simplified to survival without leverage. This is what the desert ultimately demands. Not excellence, not dominance, alignment. Those who align early persist longer. Those who align late persist briefly. Those who never align disappear. The predator has aligned, just not soon enough to avoid the narrowing entirely. The warning signs were present all along. Hesitation without consequence. Restraint rewarded short-term territory. Eroded quietly, recovery delayed incrementally. The desert allowed these signals to be misread until correction was no longer possible. Now every choice is reactive. The predator remains alive, alert, aware. But survival has shifted from strategy to endurance. Days become cycles of maintenance rather than pursuit. The environment has completed its negotiation. There will be no dramatic ending here, no final chase, no collapse to mark failure. The desert rarely offers such clarity. Instead, it leaves behind an animal still standing, still breathing, operating within a margin so thin that even success cannot expand it. This is the sign of the critical point, not when instinct fails, but when recovery stops forgiving. From here, the story does not ask what should be done next. It asks only how long alignment can be maintained before chance intervenes. The climax does not arrive as a single event. It arrives as inevitability. By now, the environment has removed all ambiguity. Heat no longer fluctuates, it persists. Shade offers interruption, not relief. Movement carries immediate cost, and stillness no longer restores what effort takes away. The body functions, but it does not rebound. The system has shifted into a state where every decision must be weighed against a margin that has already been spent. This is where the desert stops teaching and starts enforcing. The predator wakes before the day fully asserts itself, not out of readiness, but necessity. Hunger has become a constant pressure rather than a cycle. The body signals need, but without urgency, that can be acted upon freely. Range is limited. Options are few. The land does not present opportunity so much as it withholds it selectively. A chance appears late under conditions that would once have been dismissed outright. The prey is smaller than ideal. Alert. Positioned near terrain that guarantees complexity. The timing is poor. Heat is already present, pressing downward without pause. In earlier chapters, restraint would have prevailed here. Now, restraint threatens stagnation. The predator commits. There is no rush, no burst. Engagement begins cautiously, conserving what remains. The body lowers, advances in controlled increments, aligning not for speed, but for efficiency. This is not instinct at its most powerful. It is instinct constrained by survival math. The prey reacts quickly, forcing lateral movement. Each adjustment registers instantly. The body absorbs the cost without delay, without buffer. Breathing widens almost immediately. Moisture loss accelerates. The predator does not escalate because it cannot. This chase is not meant to succeed. It is meant to decide. As seconds pass, the internal ceiling asserts itself again, not as resistance, but as boundary. The predator reaches the limit of safe exertion faster than ever before. Instinct presses for continuation, but the body enforces cessation with clarity that leaves no room for negotiation. The predator disengages. This time there is no recovery afterward. Movement towards shade is slower, deliberate, minimal. The body does not collapse, but it does not stabilize either. Heat remains elevated. Breathing stays wide. Time passes without improvement. The system has entered a steady state where exertion and rest no longer rebalance. This is the climax, not a moment of failure, but a moment of truth. The desert has removed the illusion that choice still governs outcome. The predator is alive, but the environment now dictates the terms of that life entirely. There is no strategy left that expands possibility. There is only alignment with limits. Rivals approach again, not aggressively, but confidently. They occupy space without challenge. The predator withdraws, conserving function, but the withdrawal no longer preserves anything new. Territory has already been reduced to its minimum viable extent. Food becomes incidental. Small successes occur, but they do not change the trajectory. Each intake is offset by the cost required to obtain it. The system has reached equilibrium, not a favorable one, but a stable one. This is what the desert ultimately demands: acceptance of constraint. The climax is not violent, because violence is inefficient here. It is not dramatic, because drama wastes energy. It is quiet, persistent, and final in its own way. The predator has not lost because it made one wrong decision. It has arrived here because every decision was made within limits that gradually tightened beyond correction. This is the consequence of survival governed by accumulation. In environments where recovery is guaranteed, risk can be corrected. In environments where recovery is conditional, risk compounds invisibly. The desert allows behavior to feel justified long after it has become unsustainable. From the outside, observers might still misread this moment. The predator stands. It moves. It hunts occasionally. There is no visible catastrophe. But the truth lies not in appearance, but in range, the shrinking space in which survival can occur. The climax reveals what the story has been building toward all along. Survival here is not about winning encounters, but about avoiding thresholds that cannot be uncrossed. Instinct refined over time can guide action only up to the point where environment overwhelms recovery. Beyond that point, instinct becomes a liability. not because it is wrong, but because it was not designed for permanence under extremes. The predator has reached the end of adaptation, not extinction, not defeat. Endurance. Life continues under constraint, governed by chance rather than control. Some days will allow more movement. Others will allow none. The predator will respond as it cannot, as it wants. The desert does not promise survival. It permits it conditionally. This is the culmination of the hidden math that has governed every chapter before this one. Energy conserved earlier delayed collapse but could not prevent convergence. Restraint preserved life but eroded leverage. Aggression reclaimed nothing because the body could not support it. The system has simplified to its final form. There is no longer a question of what should be done. There is only the question of what can still be done today. The climax does not close the story. It seals its logic. What follows will not be resolution in the traditional sense. There will be no reversal, no lesson that restores balance, only continuity within limits shaped by an environment that does not forgive late alignment. The desert has finished negotiating, and the predator remains alive, constrained, aligned. What remains to be seen is not whether it will act again, but how long the environment will continue to allow it to persist within a margin this thin. The desert looks the same as it always has. Light spreads across the ground without emphasis. Heat settles early, presses steadily, then holds. Wind moves without cooling. Nothing signals that anything has changed. The landscape offers no markers to distinguish this day from the last, or this moment from the countless others it has absorbed. Yet the balance has shifted. The predator moves less now, not out of caution, but because the environment has made movement expensive in a way that cannot be offset. Each step is calculated not strategically, but physically. The body allows only what it can sustain without worsening what cannot be repaired. This is not fear, it is compliance. The desert has reduced survival to a narrow channel where action is permitted only if it does not demand recovery. The environment will not provide. Within that channel, life continues quietly, persistently, without momentum. Occasionally, opportunity appears, not the kind that promises resolution, but the kind that tests alignment. A brief opening, a minor advantage. Something that could be taken if taken carefully enough. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. The outcome matters less than the cost required to reach it. What has changed is not behavior but expectation. The predator no longer acts under the assumption that effort leads to improvement. It acts under the assumption that effort must justify itself immediately. There is no future buffer to borrow from, no later recovery to depend on. The present carries the full weight of every decision. This is the final adaptation the desert enforces, not efficiency, not intelligence, acceptance. Acceptance that survival here is not a trajectory, but a condition. It does not build toward anything. It does not promise persistence. It allows continuity only so long as alignment is maintained with limits that shift without warning. From the outside, this acceptance can look like failure, hunts abandoned, territory reduced, presence diminished. But these are not signs of defeat. They are signs of adjustment to a system that does not reward insistence. The predator remains because it has learned late but decisively that success is not measured by capture or dominance, but by avoiding the one mistake that ends everything. It has learned that restraint is not weakness, and that aggression without recovery is not courage. The desert does not care when this understanding arrives. Early or late, it enforces the same rule. Those who align sooner persist longer. Those who align later persist briefly. Those who never align disappear without record. This story does not end with triumph, because triumph implies permanence. It does not end with loss, because loss implies closure. It ends with continuity under constraint, the only outcome the desert consistently allows. Tomorrow will resemble today. Conditions may shift slightly. Opportunity may expand or contract. Chance may intervene. None of this changes the core truth now governing survival here. Instinct alone is insufficient. Strategy without recovery is meaningless. An effort that ignores limits is indistinguishable from self-destruction. The predator will continue to exist within this margin for as long as the environment permits. There is no promise beyond that. No arc bending toward safety. Only the ongoing negotiation between body and land conducted without words, enforced without mercy. The desert does not ask why a chase was abandoned. It does not care whether a hunt was winnable. It only records whether alignment was maintained. And somewhere within this quiet persistence lies the answer to the question that began the story. Why would a predator choose to fail on purpose? Because in extreme environments, survival is not decided by hunger or strength, but by the ability to stop before success becomes fatal. The desert remains unchanged. What endures is not victory, but those who learn when not to pursue it.